I want you to picture something with me for a second. It's Thanksgiving morning in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of morning that makes you feel like the world is actually good, crisp air outside, wood smoke from somebody's fireplace drifting over the cul-de-sac, a turkey already in the oven, and the whole house smelling like brown sugar and cinnamon, and everything I ever thought a real life was supposed to feel like. My name is Amanda Reeves. Well, it was Amanda Reeves. Now it's Amanda Calloway again, back to my maiden name, and honestly, getting that name back felt like getting oxygen after 3 years underwater. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That Thanksgiving morning, I was 34 years old, standing in my kitchen in Ballantyne, a nice suburb on the south side of Charlotte, wearing my grandmother's apron. My hair still in a ponytail, bare feet on the hardwood floor I had picked out myself. My two kids, Logan and Brianna, 9 and 7 at the time, were in the living room watching the Macy's parade with their dad, my husband Daniel. The house was warm, the table was set. My mother-in-law Linda and father-in-law Gary were due to arrive at noon, and I had already made the sweet potato casserole, the green bean casserole, and the cranberry sauce from scratch. I had even made little place cards with fall leaves I'd hot glued to wooden clothespins, because that was the kind of woman I was back then. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted this family to feel like mine. Lord, I wish somebody had sat me down at that kitchen island and told me what was actually going on in that house. Let me back up and tell you who I am, because I think you need to understand what I had built before I can explain how someone tried to tear it all down from the inside. I grew up in Gastonia, about 20 miles west of Charlotte. Blue-collar town, good people. My dad drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery distributor for 31 years. My mom was a church secretary at First Baptist for most of my childhood. We weren't rich by any stretch, but we never went without. Every Friday night in the fall, we went to my brother Kevin's high school football games. Every Sunday after church, we went to my grandparents' house for lunch, collard greens, cornbread, iced tea, the whole spread. I grew up understanding that family meant showing up. Family meant sacrifice. Family meant you don't quit on people just because things got hard. I went to UNC Charlotte on a partial scholarship and got my degree in accounting. Met Daniel Reeves my junior year. He was funny, charming, tall, played intramural basketball, drove an older Jeep he'd paid for himself, had this easy confidence that I just fell for completely. His family was from Mooresville, about 30 minutes north of Charlotte. His dad, Gary, had been in commercial real estate for years, and his mom, Linda, God. Linda was one of those Southern women who could make you feel welcome and judged at the exact same time. She'd hug you at the door and then say something like, "Oh, honey, that dress is so brave on you." You know the type, bless her heart. Daniel and I got married in June of 2014. Small wedding, outdoor ceremony at a vineyard outside of Concord. About 50 people, nothing fancy. My dress was $300 off the rack at David's Bridal. Linda had opinions about that, but I smiled through them. We honeymooned in Myrtle Beach and thought it was the most romantic thing in the world. We were 26 years old and we thought we had everything figured out. By 2019, we had settled into life in Ballantyne. 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath house, cream-colored vinyl siding, a covered front porch, a fenced backyard where the kids played and Daniel grilled every Saturday in the summer. I was working as a staff accountant for a mid-size healthcare company downtown. Daniel worked for a commercial construction firm that his dad had helped him get into. We had 2 car payments, a mortgage we stretched ourselves for, and about $12,000 in savings that we were trying to grow. We weren't living large, but we were building something. I was proud of what we'd built. The kids were in school at Hawk Ridge Elementary. I helped with the book fair every year. I was in a neighborhood mom group that met every other Wednesday at somebody's house. Wine, snacks, whatever everyone was going through at the time. Daniel coached Logan's rec league soccer in the fall. Every 4th of July, our neighborhood had a big block party in the cul-de-sac. Cornhole, sparklers, the ice cream truck always came around at dusk. We'd sit in our camp chairs and watch the city fireworks off in the distance, and Logan would fall asleep in my lap every single time. That was my life. That was everything I had worked for and loved. And then there was Daniel's family. Gary and Linda lived in Mooresville in a ranch house on Lake Norman. Gary was 62, mostly retired, but still did consulting work sometimes. Linda was 60, didn't work, spent most of her time at their country club on Facebook, and, as I would eventually learn, in my business. They had 2 kids, Daniel and his younger sister, Kristen. Kristen, oh, where do I even start with Kristen? She was 29 at the time and lived about 10 minutes from Gary and Linda. She'd gone to NC State for 2 years, dropped out, worked at a gym for a while, then at a boutique. Then she was doing some freelance social media stuff, which, from what I could tell, mostly meant posting on her own Instagram account. She had never married, no kids, no mortgage, and what seemed like zero accountability for any of it. Her parents had let her move back in with them twice in the past 5 years and never seemed to bat an eye. Meanwhile, every life choice I made was quietly scrutinized by Linda at every family dinner. I want to be fair. In the early years, I genuinely tried with Kristen. We'd go to brunch, just the 2 of us sometimes. I showed up to her birthday parties. I engaged with her posts on Facebook. When she went through a bad breakup in 2017, I took her a casserole and sat with her for 2 hours. I wanted to be the sister-in-law who actually showed up. But there was always something with Kristen. She had this way of looking at Daniel and me, at our house, our life, our stability, that I can only describe as hunger. Like she was sitting just outside of a window, watching something she wanted but couldn't get to. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. The first red flags were so small I almost didn't catch them. Not because I was naive, I was a trained accountant, I noticed things, but because I desperately wanted this family to love me the way I loved them. So I explained things away, I rationalized. For instance, the group chat. Daniel's family had a group chat on their phones. I assume it had been there since before Daniel and I got together. That was fine. But somewhere around 2018, I started noticing that Daniel would reference conversations that had happened in that chat, plans that had been made, things that had been discussed, and I hadn't been included in any of it. Now, maybe that sounds petty. Maybe you're thinking, who cares about a family group chat? But when it's happening consistently, and when the things being planned are family events, dinners, Christmas morning logistics, a beach trip to Wrightsville, it starts to feel like a message. It starts to feel intentional. I mentioned it to Daniel once casually and he said, "Oh, I'll add you." He never did. There was also the money thing, small stuff at first. Kristen borrowed $100 from me in the spring of 2018 for a car repair. Never paid it back. A few months later, she mentioned she needed help with her electric bill. Daniel lent her $250 without telling me until after it happened. I wasn't furious. I understood families help each other out, but when I asked if she'd paid us back, Daniel kind of shrugged and said, "Probably next month." It was never next month. Linda, for her part, had perfected the art of the soft dig. At Easter dinner in 2019, she looked at my house and said, "Amanda, I know you're just renting your taste for now, but someday you'll have something real." I smiled. I said, "This is real to me, Linda." She patted my hand like I'd said something sweet and changed the subject. Daniel pretended he hadn't heard it. I remember calling my mom that night in the car, driving home from Mooresville, Logan and Brianna asleep in their car seats. I told her what Linda had said, and my mom was quiet for a second, then said, "Baby, some people only know how to love from a position of feeling better than you." I held on to that. I still hold on to it. But the thing is, despite all of it, I still believed in the family. I still believed in Daniel, because on the good days it was so good. He was a good father. He was funny at barbecues, he helped Logan with his homework, he brought me coffee on Saturday mornings. I had built my whole life in the architecture of that marriage, and I wasn't ready to see the cracks for what they were. So on that Thanksgiving morning, I stirred my pots and set my table and put out my little handmade place cards, and I genuinely felt hopeful. Linda and Gary arrived at noon. Kristen came about 40 minutes later, smelling like perfume and carrying a bag from Harris Teeter with a store-bought pie and a bottle of wine she absolutely could not afford. She kissed my cheek at the door. Amanda, girl, this house looks so good. You've done so much with it. Warm, genuine seeming, I thanked her and handed her a glass of sweet tea. We had the whole dinner, turkey, dressing, all of it. Linda said grace. Gary told a long story about a real estate deal that had almost gone sideways in '94. Logan knocked over his apple juice and Brianna screamed about it and we all laughed. And for about 45 minutes, it felt like a real family Thanksgiving. After dinner, the men went to the living room to watch football. Linda and Kristen helped me clear the table, or at least stood in the kitchen while I cleared the table. I overheard them whispering about something when they thought I was in the pantry, but when I came back out, they both smiled at me like nothing had happened. I didn't think anything of it. I should have. Looking back now, I can trace almost every thread of what was about to happen back to that kitchen, that whisper, that smile. But at the time, I was tired and grateful and full of turkey, and I thought the hardest part of that day was going to be getting Brianna down to sleep before 9 o'clock. That Christmas morning, we sat around the tree in matching pajamas. Linda had bought a matching set for the whole family, even for her and Gary, and insisted we take photos for Facebook. She posted them herself, tagged everyone, wrote a caption about what a blessing family is. I liked the post. I left a little heart emoji in the comments. I had no idea that two people smiling at me in that photo had already been lying to my face for over a year. The first time I noticed something was wrong with our finances, I told myself I had made an error. That sounds strange coming from an accountant. But you have to understand, when something feels impossible, when something contradicts everything you believe about your life, your first instinct is to find the mistake in the data. Because if it's a mistake, you can fix it. If it's not a mistake, if the numbers are right and your life is wrong, then everything falls apart. It was January of 2020. New Year's had just passed. Logan had gone back to school. Daniel was back at work. I was sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening going through our credit card statements, something I did every month like clockwork, and I noticed a charge I didn't recognize. Not a huge charge, $37 at a hardware store in Mooresville. I didn't think much of it at first. Daniel did projects around the house sometimes. He was up in Mooresville a lot for work. But then the following month, there it was again, $60-something, same Mooresville hardware store, and a charge from a place I'd never heard of, a design firm, it looked like. Interior design, maybe, a couple $100. I texted Daniel. Hey, what are these charges from Mooresville? Did you buy something for the house? He texted back 30 minutes later. Oh yeah, Dad needed something for a project. I covered it. He'll pay me back. I put the phone down. I thought about saying something more. But I'd learned over 5 years that pressing Daniel on money stuff related to his family almost always ended in a fight where somehow I was the one being unreasonable. So I let it go. That was January. By April, I had found 6 separate charges on our credit card that followed the same pattern: Mooresville hardware stores, a lumber yard. Something called a project coordination fee, a deposit to something I couldn't identify. Nothing individually enormous, but together they added up to almost $4,000. $4,000 I had not approved, had not discussed, had not been informed about. I brought it up again. Daniel said his dad had a project going, some renovation work, and he'd been covering small costs here and there because his parents were tight on cash temporarily. He said it was nothing. He said his dad was going to pay him back. He said I was making a big deal out of something small. It's $4,000, Daniel. It's my family, Amanda. And there it was, the conversation ender. It's my family. As if our family, the 4 of us, our mortgage, our savings account, wasn't the family that mattered most. I should have pushed harder, I know that now. But I thought I understood what was happening. I thought his parents were going through a rough patch and Daniel was quietly helping them out and feeling embarrassed about it. It had happened before. Gary had had a few bad years in commercial real estate when the market softened. They'd borrowed a little and paid it back. I thought this was that. It was not that. In May of 2020, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a mortgage company I had never heard of, a lender based in South Carolina, and the letter referenced a home equity line of credit that had been opened in my name, my full legal name, my social security number, my Charlotte address. I stood at the kitchen counter and read that letter 3 times. I had never applied for a home equity line of credit, not with this company. Not with anyone, not recently. My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my feet. I waited until the kids were in bed. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I pulled up all 3 of my credit reports: Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, and what I found there rearranged every understanding I had of my own life. There were accounts I did not open. There were inquiries I did not authorize. There was a line of credit for $45,000 that someone had taken out in my name 7 months earlier. There was a second inquiry from a bank I had never done business with. And running through all of it like a thread I could barely follow were addresses and account details that led back to one place: Mooresville. I sat there for a long time. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me later. I thought I would cry. Instead, I just sat there feeling this cold, slow clarity move through me, like watching ice form over a pond, still, quiet. And underneath it, something I'd tried not to feel for months. I already knew, didn't I? On some level, the accountant in me had already known. I'd been refusing to add up the numbers because I didn't want to see the sum. I pulled up the county property records for Mecklenburg, Iredell, and the surrounding counties. I searched Gary and Linda Reeves, and there it was, clear as a tax bill, a property purchase in Mooresville, lakefront, a house that had sold for $890,000, $800,090,000. Gary and Linda Reeves had bought a lakefront mansion. They had financed it using a combination of methods, and one of those methods was a home equity line of credit taken out in my name, my credit. My identity. I pressed my hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking. The next thing I did, and I am still proud of this because it would have been so easy to panic, the next thing I did was open a spreadsheet. I started documenting everything. Every charge on our credit card that had gone to Mooresville, every inquiry on my credit report, every date, every amount, every account number. I screenshot everything. I saved it to a separate drive. I printed paper copies. I built a file folder in my kitchen office drawer and labeled it with a Post-it note that said house expenses, so Daniel wouldn't think anything of it if he saw it. Then I did something that cost me more than I can explain. I did not say anything to Daniel. I know that sounds wrong. I know it sounds like I should have confronted him right then and there. But I had spent 5 years watching Daniel choose his family over our family every single time it mattered. And I needed to know, really know, how deep this went before I blew it all up. Because if I confronted him and he immediately told Gary and Linda, my evidence would disappear. I'd seen enough financial fraud cases in my professional life to know that you don't tip off the other side before you're ready. So I kept building my file, and I kept watching. It was a Tuesday in June when I found out about Daniel and Kristen. I had taken the day off work. Brianna had a dentist appointment in the morning, and I figured I'd work from home after. Daniel was supposed to be at a job site in Concord all day. I'd gotten Brianna to school, run some errands, and I was back home around 11. I walked in the side door from the garage and I heard voices upstairs. For one absurd second, I thought it was the TV, and then I realized it wasn't. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and I listened. I heard my husband's voice, and I heard Kristen's voice, and Lord, I cannot describe what the next 30 seconds felt like. Something inside me, something I hadn't even known was there, just broke, not explosively, quietly, like a bone that cracks clean through without anyone hearing it. I don't remember walking up the stairs. I don't remember what I said at the door. I remember the look on Daniel's face, not guilt exactly, but something worse: relief. Like he was finally done pretending. What followed was the worst afternoon of my life. I will spare you most of it except to say this: the conversation that happened next was not about remorse. Daniel was not sorry. He was tired of hiding it. He said things I will never repeat. Kristen didn't even stay. She left while Daniel and I were still in the hallway, and she looked at me on her way out the door with an expression that I realize now was somewhere between shame and satisfaction. I made Daniel leave that afternoon. I don't even remember the words I used. I just know he left. And then I sat in my living room in the middle of a Tuesday, in the house I had loved, with Paw Patrol playing on the TV because I'd forgotten to turn it off. And I cried the kind of crying that doesn't sound like crying, it sounds like silence. My mom answered on the first ring. "Mama," I said, "I need to tell you something." She was at my house in 2 hours. She came in through the garage, walked straight to me on the couch, and held me without saying a word for a long time. Then she made me eat something. Then she helped me think. The days after that are a blur of school pickup and frozen meals, and my mother sleeping in my guest room and Daniel texting me things I didn't have the energy to respond to. I called my best friend Renata, who had known me since the 6th grade, and she drove over from Huntersville with wine and brownies and stayed until 2 in the morning just listening. I called my pastor, Brother Willis, and sat in his office for an hour, crying and then not crying and then crying again. Church had always been a constant for me, Second Baptist on Pineville Matthews Road. A congregation that had known me since Daniel and I started attending in 2015, and walking through those doors the Sunday after everything happened and having people wrap around me like a community. Was supposed to do. I don't have words for that. Meanwhile, I kept building my file. My neighbor Donna, sweet, sharp Donna, who worked for a title company and knew more about real estate transactions than most agents I'd ever met. She noticed the Mooresville property listing in the county records I'd mentioned. While she was helping me look something up, she pulled the full history, she found the closing documents, she found the names on the deed. And tucked inside the financing summary, like it had been trying to hide, was an equity line referencing my social security number. My name. "Amanda," Donna said, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop, "this is identity theft." I said, "I know." She said, "Have you talked to an attorney?" I said, "I have one." Because I did. I had called Sharon Park 2 days after I found the credit report. Sharon Park, family law attorney in Charlotte, sharp as a tack, no nonsense, exactly the kind of woman you want in your corner when everything is on fire. She didn't panic. She laid out my options like a map. She told me what to document, what not to touch, who to contact, and what order to do everything in. I followed her instructions to the letter. But before the legal process could really get moving, something happened that I had not anticipated. Linda found out that I knew. I'm still not entirely sure how. My best guess is that Daniel told her because Daniel, even then, even after everything, was still protecting his mother. Still her son first, my husband second. Maybe he warned her because he thought I'd back down if she came at me directly. Maybe he just couldn't hold information without giving it to the people who'd always been his real family. Whatever the reason, Linda called me on a Thursday afternoon in late June while I was in the Target parking lot on Johnston Road. I saw her name on my screen and almost didn't answer. But Sharon had told me to document everything, and that meant staying engaged. I answered. "Amanda." Her voice was sweet, sticky sweet like a candy wrapper. "I think we need to have a conversation." "I agree," I said. I pressed record on my phone's voice memo app. What followed was 22 minutes of the most extraordinary display of manipulation I have ever witnessed. Linda acknowledged nothing, denied everything subtly, suggested that I had misunderstood the financial paperwork, implied that I had perhaps signed something without reading it properly. And then, and this is the part that still makes my jaw tighten, she said, "I really hope you're not about to destroy this family over a misunderstanding. Because the children will suffer most, my children." She had the nerve to use my children as leverage. I sat very still in that parking lot. A woman walked by pushing a cart with her toddler sitting in the front. The sun was going down behind the strip mall. I took a breath. "Linda," I said, "I appreciate you calling. I'll have my attorney be in touch." And I hung up. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after that. I cried not out of grief this time, out of something else. Out of 5 years of being patient and accommodating and second-guessing my own instincts for people who had never, not once, put me first. Out of recognizing, finally and completely, that I had been treated like a resource, not a member of this family. I had been tolerated because I was useful. I had been smiled at because I was a means to an end. And that night, sitting alone in the driveway of the house we'd bought together, the porch light on, the kids asleep inside, the neighborhood quiet, I felt the last piece of the old me let go. I called Sharon. I told her everything, every document, every recording, every date. Okay, she said, then we're ready. The thing about justice is that it rarely looks the way you imagine it will. When I was sitting in that driveway in June, I think I half imagined something dramatic, a courtroom scene, a confrontation at a family dinner table. Some moment where the truth came out all at once in front of everyone, and there was a reckoning. Like a movie, like something that would feel as big as what had been done to me, what actually happened was quieter than that. Slower, more paperwork and less theater. And somehow, I didn't expect this. It was more satisfying than any dramatic scene could have been. Let me tell you how it unfolded. Sharon's first move was to file a police report on my behalf for identity theft. This was not a dramatic step, it was a procedural one. But it was essential because without that police report, I couldn't begin the formal dispute process with the credit bureaus. And I couldn't start the civil action that Sharon was already mapping out. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Simmons at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, was thorough and serious. She had seen cases like this before. She told me that fraud within families was more common than most people realized, and that the documentation I had assembled was unusually strong. "You're an accountant," she said almost admiringly when she went through my folder. "I am," I said. At the same time, Sharon was building the divorce filing. Daniel had moved into an apartment in University City, renting, predictably, with help from Gary and Linda. He'd hired a mediocre attorney, a man named Bryce something, who seemed more interested in settling than fighting. That turned out to be useful. When Sharon sent over the initial discovery requests, including requests for documentation on all financial transactions involving Daniel, Gary, Linda, and any jointly held accounts or lines of credit, Bryce something apparently had a very uncomfortable conversation with his client about the scope of what was being uncovered. Daniel called me one night in early August, not to apologize, not really, but to say that his parents had done something wrong and that he hadn't known the full extent of it. He said it like he wanted credit for the honesty. I listened. I didn't say much. Sharon had told me to avoid admissions or agreements over the phone, and I was following that instruction. But what I heard in his voice that night was fear, and I recognized it for what it was: not fear for me, not remorse, but fear for himself. Fear that he was about to face consequences for something he'd either participated in or willfully ignored. I said, "Daniel, your attorney and my attorney will handle it," and I hung up. The civil suit naming Gary and Linda, and to a more limited extent, Daniel as an enabling party, moved forward through the summer and fall. Gary hired a real estate attorney from Mooresville, a slick man in a good suit who tried to argue that the home equity line had been opened with Amanda Reeves's knowledge and consent, and that any confusion was a product of informal family financial arrangements. Sharon took that argument apart piece by piece. She had the credit application with a signature that wasn't quite mine. She had the IP address logs from the online application. She had dates that didn't line up with my whereabouts. She had the recorded phone call with Linda. She had 4 years of financial records showing a pattern of unauthorized use of joint accounts. Gary and Linda's attorney got quieter as the months went on. In November, Detective Simmons called me with an update. The DA's office was moving forward with charges: identity theft, financial fraud, unauthorized use of personal identifying information. These were felony-level charges in North Carolina. I won't pretend I felt pure satisfaction when I heard that. It was more complicated than satisfaction. There was grief mixed in there too, because even after everything, Gary and Linda were the grandparents of my children. That was not nothing. That would never be nothing. But I also knew that what they had done, using my name, my social security number, My credit score that I had built carefully over 15 years of responsible decisions was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was deliberate and calculated, and they had been counting on the fact that I would either not notice or not fight back. They had chosen the wrong woman. The civil settlement came first, in late November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Gary and Linda agreed to a financial settlement that included full repayment of the fraudulent line of credit, damages for the harm done to my credit, and legal fees. They also agreed to the sale of the Mooresville lakefront property, the mansion. The beautiful $890,000 lakefront mansion that they had bought on my credit, on my good name, with years of my financial responsibility. It sold in February. I won't tell you the exact number of the settlement I received because that feels private. But I will tell you it was enough to pay off my mortgage on the Charlotte house outright, put money away for Logan and Brianna's college funds, and breathe for the first time in years without calculating whether I could afford to. The divorce was finalized in January. Sharon was extraordinary. We got the terms I needed: primary physical custody of Logan and Brianna, child support, the house, my retirement accounts untouched. Daniel got his apartment lease and an arrangement where he saw the kids every other weekend and one evening a week. He showed up for those visits consistently, and I gave him credit for that. Whatever had happened between us, Logan and Brianna needed their father to be present, and I was not going to weaponize them. I refused to do that. I had seen what it looked like when divorced parents did that to their kids, and I would not be that. I did not speak to Linda or Gary again after the settlement was signed. Not because I was told not to, I could have legally, but because I had nothing left to say to them, and more importantly, I had nothing left to gain from saying it. Kristen, from what I heard through mutual social circles, had moved to Raleigh sometime in the fall. She and Daniel didn't last. I'm not sure they were ever really what either of them thought they were, but that was not my story to tell or my wound to tend. Now here's the part people always want to know: the social reckoning, the neighborhood gossip, the Facebook drama. I'm going to tell you the truth about that because it was not what I expected. I did not post anything on Facebook. I did not send a blast to the school mom group. I did not march into church on a Sunday and announce what had happened. I told the people I trusted most, Renata, my neighbor Donna, a few close friends from the mom group who had already guessed something was wrong, and I let those truths move the way truths move in communities, which is quietly and completely. By Halloween, people in the neighborhood knew. By Thanksgiving, the church knew. I didn't orchestrate any of it. I didn't have to. The truth has a way of finding air, especially in a community like ours where everyone's life is somewhat visible and everyone talks in parking lots and pew rows and by the mailbox. Linda had been a presence in our church community. She came with Daniel and me sometimes, made a point of being seen, charmed people the way she always did. When word got around about what she and Gary had done, the response from that community was quiet but definitive. People who had always been warm to her at services became politely unavailable. A woman who had been Linda's main connection at Second Baptist, one of those church ladies who knows everyone and quietly determines social standing, told me privately that she was appalled and not surprised, which told me everything about what Linda had been like behind closed doors long before I came along. Some people stayed neutral. That's the reality of community fallout. Some people are conflict averse enough that they'll hold the hands of both parties and never take a stand. I understood it. I didn't have the energy to hold it against anyone. I was too busy living my own life forward. My first Thanksgiving alone, just me and Logan and Brianna, was in my own kitchen, with Renata and her husband Marcus and their 2 kids coming over at 2 o'clock. And my mom driving up from Gastonia in the morning. We cooked together. Logan helped mash the potatoes. Brianna was in charge of the dinner rolls, which she burned slightly on one side and announced were rustic. We laughed so hard the kitchen filled up with it. No place cards, no performance. Just a table full of people who actually loved each other. I cried a little in the kitchen while the turkey rested, not from sadness, but from something that felt like relief releasing itself from my body all at once. My mom came in and put her arm around me, and I leaned into her the way I hadn't since I was little, and she said, "You made it, baby." I had. That Christmas, I took the kids to see the Christmas lights at Daniel Stowe Botanical Garden, something I'd always wanted to do and we'd never gotten around to. We walked through those trails in the cold, breath-visible Logan and Brianna on either side of me, and the lights were everywhere, and Brianna said, "Mama, it's like magic," and I thought, yes. Yes, it is. This is magic. This quiet, hard-won, regular life is magic. I got a promotion at work in February, controller position. The kind of role I had been building toward for years had been quietly passed over for because I was always navigating some family crisis that drained my energy. With the storm settled, with my life truly mine again, I showed up differently at work. I showed up present. My boss, a woman named Dr. Patricia Huang, who did not suffer mediocrity lightly, pulled me into her office after the announcement and said, "You have been underutilizing yourself for years. I'm glad you're here now." That sentence meant more to me than she probably knew. In the spring, I joined a women's Bible study at Second Baptist that met on Tuesday evenings. Just 8 women, a living room, scripture, and real conversation. No performance, no social climbing, no passive-aggressive comments about my clothing choices. Just women who showed up honestly for each other. Some of them had been through divorces, some through losses I couldn't imagine. All of them had the kind of strength that comes from having survived something and chosen not to let it make you bitter. Those Tuesday nights became the most nourishing part of my week. Logan and Brianna adjusted better than I had feared. Children are honest barometers. Once the tension left the house, once there was no longer an undercurrent of unspoken conflict, no more hushed arguments after bedtime, no more of my exhausted pretending, they relaxed. Logan started sleeping through the night again. Brianna stopped biting her nails. They had their dad on his weekends. They had me every day. They had a home that felt like peace. I took them to a Hornets game in March, their first NBA game, nosebleed seats, overpriced hot dogs, and all 3 of us wearing teal. Logan screamed for the whole third quarter. Brianna made friends with the kids sitting next to her in about 4 minutes. I sat between my children in that arena, in all that noise and color and light, and I thought, this is mine. This life is mine, not the one I planned, not the one I thought I wanted, but mine. I drove past the old Mooresville neighborhood once, not intentionally. I was coming back from visiting a client near Lake Norman and took a wrong turn. The lakefront mansion came into view through the trees as I rounded a bend on the road. There were new owners' cars in the driveway. The blinds were open. Someone's outdoor furniture was on the back deck overlooking the water. A beautiful house occupied by people who knew nothing about what it had cost someone else. I didn't slow down. I kept driving. The criminal case concluded that spring. Gary received a felony conviction and probation. Linda received a suspended sentence and community service. Both were required to pay restitution on top of the civil settlement. Their attorney had argued for leniency given their ages and lack of prior criminal history. The judge was not moved to leniency on the restitution question. I was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. Sharon was, and she called me immediately after. I was in my car in the parking deck at work, eating a sandwich at lunch, and I answered and she told me the outcome and I said, "Thank you, Sharon," and then I sat there for a minute in the dim of the parking deck and I said a prayer. Not for Gary and Linda's suffering. I wasn't at a place in my healing where I could honestly pray for them, and I wasn't going to be dishonest about that to God. I prayed for my children. I prayed for myself. I prayed that Logan and Brianna would grow up understanding the difference between family by blood and family by character. That they would know that real love doesn't take from you without asking. Real love doesn't use your name in dark. And then I finished my sandwich and went back to work. Here's what I know now, on the other side of all of it. I know that betrayal from the people closest to you carries a particular weight that ordinary hardship doesn't. It doesn't just hurt, it restructures you. It makes you question every room you've ever stood in, every hand you've ever shaken, every dinner table you've ever felt safe at. For a while, that restructuring feels like damage. It feels like loss. And maybe it is at first, but restructuring is also how bones heal stronger after a break. And there is something that happens to a woman who discovers that everything she feared losing can be survived. There is a recalibration of what she actually needs to be okay. There is a rediscovery of her own name, not just legally, not just on paper, but in the deepest sense. Who she is without the performance. Who she is when she stops accommodating and starts deciding. I am Amanda Calloway. I am an accountant and a mother and a church woman and a neighbor and a friend. I grew up in Gastonia and I live in Charlotte and I raise 2 kids in a house that is mine, all mine, free and clear. I make collard greens from my grandmother's recipe and I burn the dinner rolls sometimes, and I go to Tuesday night Bible study and I take my kids to NBA games and I keep my credit reports current and I sleep well. Some people will read this story and focus on what was done to me. And I understand that it was worth being angry about and I was angry and the anger was right and useful and eventually I set it down. But what I want you to take from this is not the theft. What I want you to take is what comes after, what is possible after. I want you to know that if someone has used your name in the dark, if someone has smiled at your table and whispered behind your back, if someone has confused your patience for permission, you can survive it. You can document it and litigate it and survive it. You can rebuild a life so good that the people who tried to diminish you become irrelevant not through drama, but through your own flourishing. The night I signed the final divorce papers, I drove home a different way than usual. Past the old neighborhood, through the winding streets where we'd trick-or-treated, past Hawk Ridge Elementary at dusk, past Second Baptist with its lit-up sign out front. Past the house where we'd all sat in our matching pajamas and taken Christmas photos for Facebook. I didn't stop, I didn't slow down, I didn't feel rage, I felt free. Real American, earned, hard-won, nobody gave it to me freedom. The kind you only get by going through something that should have broken you and discovering, to your own surprise, on a Tuesday evening in February, or in a Hornets arena in March. Or in a parking deck at lunchtime that it didn't. That you are still here, that you are still you, that your name belongs to you again, and nobody is taking it back.